Okay, so this is our second video on fences. We're going to be looking today at scene 4 from Act 1, continue where we left off, and seeing, depends how it goes, how long it takes. I'd like to also hopefully get into scene 1 from Act 2. All right. I would encourage you all very much to try to finish fences for next week. Um, we'll be talking about it next week, and if need be, we'll even talk about it for a further week with these videos. Uh, but I do want to, at the most, 2 more weeks on this because I do want to move on to Hamlet. We still have plenty of time, so it's not a time restriction. But Hamlet will be a bit more challenging, and I want to be sure we have plenty of time to go through it. But try to get through fences for next week, and at most we'll wrap it up, if not next week, the week after. Um, I will be putting together the questions for your midterm. I'll try to have them, if not by the end of this week, I'll be posting them next week. A reminder that you'll have 2 weeks from the time that I post the question or questions. You'll have 2 weeks to write your essay and submit it to me through Omnivox. All right. Along the way, I will be also putting up some posting some videos on essay writing, things that we've discussed in class that I will revisit. Sentence structure, essay structure, thesis statements, things like that. So we'll have that. I'll probably have PowerPoints with that and videos. So as always, keep checking Omnivox to see what's coming, what I'm posting. Um, Remember that tomorrow we will be having a Google Meet live at 2 o'clock class time. Um, which these live interactions that we're going to have, these live classes, are mainly, at this stage, I'm looking at them as a means by which where you can actually ask me questions directly. We'll still talk about the play. We'll see how it goes. Again, this is all very new. But certainly, if you have questions, tomorrow's the time to bring them up. And we'll proceed from there. I encourage your feedback. Um, I'm accustomed to being able to see you and to be able to gauge from your faces, what's working, what's not working, and I can't do that now, and it's very frustrating from my end. But this is our situation, and we have to work with it. So again, your feedback will be helpful for everyone as we proceed. Um, I think that again for the final exam, if again because we don't know if we're going to be going back into the classroom. If we do, obviously it'll be a final exam in class. If we don't, it'll take on the same format as our midterm. You'll have the questions. You'll have 2 weeks to write the essay. And for the in-class assignments, again, just a reminder, I'm still mulling that over how that's going to be. I don't want you to stress over that. It will be something where you will have an assignment that I will post on Omnivox, and you'll have 24 hours, 48 hours to do it and send it back to me. It won't be overly challenging. It could be about the texts we're reading, or they could be grammar exercises and things like that. All right. So we'll get to all that. Remember, I'm pretty sure we still have 8 weeks. So we have time. And these first week or two navigating through this new online platform is how we figure out what's working, what's not working, and so on. So again, a reminder, the PowerPoint for fences is up. You've seen it. You want to keep coming back to it. I may add more PowerPoints. I'm going to see how that goes. But this gives you some guidelines. You can keep coming back to this, referencing this in relation to the readings. What what I plan on doing with these videos, as you know, is to continue the close reading that we were doing in the classroom to help you, to guide you through it and point out certain things that then you can work with as we proceed. So Scene 4, Act 1, Scene 4. So this scene, and it bleeds in nicely with beginning of Act 2. These are big moments, right? We're getting halfway through the play, and a lot's going on here. Again, we don't have the luxury of me being able to go into it into too much detail, and I am going to try and move fairly quickly through this, but we need to have a general sense of what's unfolding. Remember, as in all literature, and certainly with plays, the sequence of events, the way the play unfolds, is important. That structure. All right, one thing leads to another, and things can't happen unless what happened before happened, and so on. So you want to be keeping that in mind, and that's why I'm continuing to proceed in that manner, because I think it's very important. This, especially when we're looking at character development and what's revealed about the characters, and their interactions to a large extent. All right, clearly, and we've seen so much of that already. We start this scene with Corey, and what we get at this beginning is we're seeing Corey's commitment, right, to his football. Right, we know this is going to be we know it is a contentious issue, and it's going to become much more contentious. But it tells us something about Corey. Excuse me, in terms of this type of commitment, demonstrates a certain kind of maturity on his part, not recognized by Troy necessarily, but he's trying to better himself. The football, remember, is not just so he can play the football game. It's also so that he can get a scholarship and go to college. All right. Again, exemplifying how things are different now than when they were when Troy was younger, where there are more opportunities, particularly for the Black community. And so it's the football is a means by which to get a better education. And that would be a positive thing. And again, Corey's commitment to this goal says a lot about his character, right? Remember, we looked at him and his interactions with Troy last video, and we're going to see how that evolves and how that interaction. Remember, father-son relationships here, and we're going to see much more of that in this video, is a key theme in this play. All right, that, and of course the theme of fences, which we're going to be getting more and more in depth with. So it's again, with Rose, you clean up your room, and we've seen this. It's a continuation. It's a setup really for when Troy and Bono arrive. And note as well here that in this scene, we're back to where we were at the first scene of the play, right? It's Friday night. They're coming back from work, Bono and Troy, and they're drinking and they're talking. But there's what's different here is what we notice right away when they arrive is that if you recall that Troy was arguing why are there no black drivers in the garbage business and so on, and there was concern. He was making waves about this. Well, here we find out that he won his case. Right? He's received a promotion. So we start this in a very elevated mood. All right, and that's again a structural thing in plays and most literature is bringing us up. The setting, the tone is uplifting. This is positive stuff, which will then lead to what follows, right? Up and down, so to speak. So we're getting this exchange between Bono and Troy, where they're talking about how he had this success in his campaign to get his promotion, and to it's not just for him personally to get a promotion, but it fits in with his general idea of fairness and trying to um, look towards improving the situation for the Black community. All right, so keep that in mind as well. It's an interesting contrast at times because we often see Troy seemingly behaving very selfishly, but this also branches out of that a little bit because it's also for a cause, a larger cause to a certain degree. So he's had his success, but what Rose comes into the picture, wants to know what's happening, how did it go. Contrasting with this good situation and this elevated mood, if you will, that they're having, we're reminded quite quickly about Troy's attitude towards Rose, right? A very precarious relationship. And we get this dog metaphor, right? Oops, let me see if we can get this up. There it is. Oops, no, that's not it. Oh, there it is. All right, I ain't no dog, because he's treating her like one, right? And this is a recurring theme here. Again, I ain't studying you and your dog. He's talking about this, the dog Blue, right? We've encountered Blue before. We're going to see more about Blue and his relationship in terms of Troy's relationship with his father. All right, hear it ring, hear it ring. He sings this song. I had a dog. His name was Blue. Doesn't want to see. Again, what's important here is Troy's treatment of Rose. Right? It isn't a joking way. He's drinking. That's all. Yes, there, but it's still disturbing, and we're not sure how to react to it. And more importantly, we're observing how Rose reacts to it. All right, her patience with Troy, her acceptance of all these flaws that Troy exhibits. All right, so we're going to see how this, especially when we get to Act 2, how this really comes to a head. So here we're getting the information that they making him a driver, and Rose's reaction. She's obviously quite happy for him, but we're still seeing how Troy is exhibiting this very, what's the word, I suppose, macho image in how he handles it. And into this, because it's Friday night, again, mirroring what was happening in the opening scene of the play, Leon's arrives. And right away, Troy's anticipating, what is Leon's there for? Well, we're probably anticipating the same thing. He's there to ask for money because it's payday, right? Friday, payday, as we saw in Act 1, Scene 1. Leon starts it off the same way. Oh, I was just in the neighborhood, thought I'd stop by. And Troy, here he come, right? He's anticipating this, but there's a bit of a reversal here, right? They're giving him the information, right? And again, this is big news. The promotion, right? First colored driver here, right? All that is happening while we're still seeing this mirroring effect of what happened in the first act. And we're anticipating, again, Leon's asking for money. But it's different this time, right? Leon's, here's your $10. He's actually coming to pay it back. Now, it's interesting here because we learn much more about Troy's relationship with Leon's, his son. This is showing responsibility. You lent me $10. I'm here to pay it back. Okay? I told you I don't want you to give me nothing. I just wanted to borrow the $10, which seems to conform quite aptly with what would be expected by Troy. Right? I mean, you're showing responsibility. You borrowed the money, you're paying it back. That should be something that would please Troy. But he doesn't. You keep that for the next time you want to ask me. Leon's again tries, and Troy, almost as if Troy doesn't trust him. Troy doesn't want to give him the opportunity here, right, to do the right thing. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing this really relates to, we have to remind ourselves, because we're about to come into the scene where we're going to find out about Troy's father. Remember, Troy's relationship with Leon's is quite different, mainly because Leon's is much older, and Troy wasn't there for Leon's upbringing, right? And it says a lot because we notice Leon's isn't conforming in many ways to what Troy looks towards as a proper behavior for a man, right? Leon's is a jazz musician. Leon's is following a dream as opposed to the pragmatic and practical approach, which we see Troy constantly hammering at Corey. And why does Leon's path has very much is very different than what Troy wants for Corey, mainly because Troy wasn't there. And we get a sense here that there's a certain, I don't know, perhaps resentment on the part of Troy that he wasn't there to guide Leon. And maybe resentment's not the right word, but there's something there where he almost doesn't want Leon's to be successful here in paying back the money, because Troy would not have been a part of that technically, because he wasn't there to teach Leon's when Leon's was growing up how to behave properly. And when Leon's does behave properly, in this case returning the money that he borrowed, Troy's reaction to that is odd. And of course, it's also going back to the mirroring of the first scene. He refuses to take it. Who ends up getting it? It goes through Rose, again showing us how that relates to what was going on in the first scene. We get Gabriel makes his appearance and referring to himself as King of the Jungle, and always again, "Hey Rose, I got a flower for you." All right, sorry for the text here. I had difficulty finding something better to put up on the screen, but you can follow in your books. So note as well Leon's behavior towards his Uncle Gabe and his respectfulness. I mean, when we look at Leon's, it's an interesting contrast when we see him in relation to Corey and in relation to Troy, and always keeping in mind that Troy is very much trying to maintain total control over Corey, but he didn't have that with Leon's. And this explains much about Leon's character being different, following the dream, a musician, not making money, but certainly living a life that conceivably is much freer, following that dream, as opposed to feeling like I have to do these things out of duty and responsibility. And it's there as a contrast. Now, we've talked about Gabriel in the past, again, playing a bit of a role as a chorus of sorts, telling us things, telling us, the audience, things, alerting us to certain things in a very bizarre way, very, very Shakespearean way, because he's playing a bit of a fool type of character, right? But of course, it's a very tragic fool because of how Gabriel became like this, which we've already discussed in terms of his injury in the war. Note here as well, when we're seeing Leon's interaction with Troy, you ought to come and listen to me play pop. Whoops, I lost this. Hold on. You ought to come down here and see me play pop. This mirrors as well when you remember in the previous scene when Corey is trying to trying to get bond to some extent with Troy. And then an interesting response here is Troy's response is, remember that Leon's is a jazz musician. Troy's response is, "I don't like that Chinese music, all that noise." Now, a couple of things with this that I think are important to note. First of all, by referencing it to Chinese music, a couple things there. First of all, it suggests very strongly that he doesn't know anything about jazz. It also demonstrates an ironic an ironic relationship that Troy has with bigotry. and perhaps racism. All right, it seems to be very derogatory to you to mention it as Chinese music. Right, and of course, much of what Troy talks about is the bigotry and the racism that has been directed towards him. So he's engaging into that's hypocritical. Um, a further irony with this is jazz music actually comes out of the black experience, and that he has such a lack of awareness of that, suggesting that he has a little awareness of his own background, which is ironic in the sense that he spent so much time talking about that black experience. So just again, a little, an interesting little sidebar, if you will, there, um, in terms of Troy's relationship and hypocrisy, a relationship with Leon's, but also the hypocrisy. And again, Leon's always, come down, listen to me, trying to find ways to get closer to his father. Um, Now, when we proceed further, because again, I'm trying to keep these reasonably short, we're going to get into this long discussion here where we're going to learn about fathers. And Bono now really starts playing an even bigger role in the play. We're going to see that here, and certainly when we get to Act Two, Scene One, Act Two. But they start talking about their own fathers, and this is important, especially when we're concentrating on this theme of father-son relationships, because what we're learning here is that both Bono and Troy are very much the people who they are to a large extent because of their fathers. And right here we see my daddy came on through, but I ain't never knew him see. This is Bono talking. Oh, again, this text is terrible. Oh, and just moving through. That's what the old folks you'd said called him. See a fellow moving around from place to place, woman to woman. Called it searching for out the new land. All right, what is this all talking about? Well, it's referencing that his father wasn't around. And with Bono, this takes on a particular element of his character insofar as Bono doesn't have children. And one of the suggested reasons here when we read through this is he was concerned that those elements of his father who was not there, father who was searching out the new land, uh, and he says, I come along, didn't want no kids, didn't know if I was going to be in one place long enough to fix them as their daddy. So the impact that the father has on the son, right? In this case, Bono's father on Bono. Um, he figured I'd be going searching too. But then he met Lucille and got grounded with that. And we notice always, well, where does Bono go? He goes to see Lucille. So there seems to be a very tight relationship. But a lot of the decisions he has made are predicated on what he learned from his father, right? And this now is going to allow us to have Troy talk about his relationship with his father. And it's an important one. And it's also not just insofar as it tells us much about Troy's character and why behaves the way he does in relation to particularly Corey. But we also note that when he's talking about his father who is a pretty bad guy, right? But also had some qualities that Troy still does admire, qualities that he's trying to instill into his son, Corey, the idea of responsibility. We go down here, he's telling the story about his father. Um, here, but I'll say this for him. He felt a responsibility towards us. Maybe he didn't treat us the way I felt he should have, but without that responsibility, he could have walked off and left it and made his own way. So, in contrast to Bono's father, who did leave, as much of a monster that Troy's father turns out to be, and we'll see that when we briefly look at the story he tells when he was 14, he respects his father to some extent because of the sense of responsibility. And this is in contrast as well, because he goes on to say that it was his mother, it was Troy's mother who left, and his father stayed. All right, 11 kids, right? Remember, to take care of 11 kids. So as much as we're going to see, and we've heard that Troy's father was really an unpleasant man, to say the least, Troy still acknowledges for him qualities in his father that he believes were good and important, qualities that he has himself adopted and that he is now trying to instill on Corey. Okay, so this section here is important, especially if you're answering a question on your exam that might be dealing with father-son relationships in the play Fences. So Bono describes his father as having the walking blues, right? In that he's always leaving. Here's Troy. My daddy ain't had them walking blues. He stayed right here with the family, but he was just as evil. And here we go with the evil, right, as he could be. My mama couldn't stand him, couldn't stand that evilness, and then she run off when I was about 8. All right? Sneaked off that way. So Troy grew up without a mother and grew up with a very domineering father. But the father stayed, as opposed to Bono's father, who ran off. How evil was Troy's father? Well, this whole story here, right? When he's talking about when he was 14, fooling around with Joe Canewell's daughter, shirking his responsibilities. Interesting, right? Because again, that theme of responsibilities comes up. When they're at the creek enjoying themselves, when the daddy came up on us, surprised us, had leather straps, right? He's going to beat him, whooping me like there was no tomorrow. I jumped up mad and embarrassed. I was scared of my daddy, right? We don't see Troy scared of much. And I run off to get out of the way. Pause. Always note the pauses. Now I thought he was mad because I ain't done my work. But I see where he was chasing me off so he could have the gal for himself. All right, this is when Troy is 14 years old, and the gal that Troy's father wants for himself is 13 years old. And when Troy recognizes this, right, it's not because you're not doing your chores or done your work. It's because you're stealing the girl that I'm after. He attacks his father. And when my daddy turned to face me, I could see that the devil had never come to get him because he was the devil himself. And the father beats him mercilessly, right? When I woke up, I was laying right there by the creek in blue. Here's the dog again, right? Remember, the dog is, we were earlier in the scene, seeing the dog in relation to Rose. The dog was licking my face. Interesting to see that in relation to Rose, right? This old dog is one that's comforting Troy, who's at this time 14 years old, who has just been beaten by his father and was blind. I couldn't see nothing. Both my eyes were swollen shut, just to make it clear how badly he was beaten. And that's when he decided to leave. Okay, and he leaves the father at 14, right? And then now it's, he's telling the story with Leon's there, and Leon's response is, 14 is kind of young to be out there on your own. So what does that tell us? First of all, that obviously Troy has never told this story to Leon's, and it's very difficult for Leon's to understand it because he has not been under the influence of Troy. And he has just a very different perspective on life because he didn't have that imposing, overbearing father figure to guide him and structure the way he lives. He goes on here to talk about how he left and moved up to the big city, to coming from the migration from the south up to the north. And he talks about what he had to do to make a living. The idea here is, well, this gets into um, the segregation issues that are always running through the story. What we're dealing with here is the idea was moving up north, get away from the south. There'd be more opportunity, and they'll for blacks specifically, um, and there'll be less racism. And he finds out, no, right, living down there in riverbanks and whatever kind of shelter they can find right down there under the shacks made of sticks, tar paper. So the dream of getting away and moving up north isn't there. And he started stealing. First it was food, then I could steal money so I could buy food. And, he lives the life of a criminal. And that ultimately leads to an incident. Went to rob a fellow, pulled out my knife, and he pulled out a gun, shot me in the chest, but I still had my knife. And then I jumped on him with my knife, and they told me I killed him. So he had a fight. He was shot in the chest. He killed the person he was fighting with, and he went to jail for 15 years. That's why he wasn't there for Leon, because at this point he had already met Leon's mother and had Leon, right here. I met your mama. I was young and anxious to be a man, and your mother had you. So again, we're trying to unpack this really complex character of Troy and why he is the way he is. And we're looking, as always, is his behavior something that is just mean-spirited, selfish, without those other qualities? Again, what we talked about last time, the way he treats Corey, is he doing that because he genuinely feels it's what's best for Corey, or is he doing it because he's jealous of Corey? Does he care about Corey? That whole discussion about I don't have to like you, and so on. And of course, when he met Rose, I got all that foolish, because 15 years in prison, I got all that foolishness out of my system, and told her, baby, it's you and baseball that count with me. And you hear me, and I meant to, and she says, which one comes first? And I told her, baby, ain't no doubt it's baseball. So which comes first in his life, baseball or Rose? All right. Rose responds to this. You ain't said no such thing talking about, baby. You and I will always be, you'll always be number one with me. Maintains this ambiguity in terms of Troy and who Troy is. And in this case now, this is setting us up to reach a point where this relationship with Rose, right? We've been looking mainly at Troy's relationship with Corey. But now we're going to see how the relationship with Rose and how important that is. If Rose, he treats her like a dog, but that dog is the same dog that was the one that was licking his face when he was 14 to revive him, comfort him, if you will, after he had been beaten by his father. When he comes out of jail after 15 years, it's Rose who seems to be there to help him, to get all that foolishness, right, out of his system. And be attentive to Bono in much of this scene and when we get into Act 2, right? Bono, Rose will keep you straight. You get off the track, she'll straighten you up. It's very important, right? Because we're going to be looking more in depth at this concept of the fences. I'm looking at the time here, and I don't think I'm going to start into Act 2. I'm going to finish up with this scene. We'll do Act 2 next week, and it's just too important there. But we'll finish up with this. Again, Leon, come down to the grill, hear me play. I'm not going to. Leon is again, we're looking at all these characters, and you want to keep coming back to them. Why are they there? All right, Bono, Leon's. they're all intermingling to give us a better understanding, mainly of Troy, and trying to determine, is Troy a good man? Is Troy a bad man? And of course, it's not that simple. So where on that balance between good and bad, arguably perhaps even evil at times, seemingly evil, where does Troy sit in this? Um, uh, Again, Leon's with the money and this exchange, which is a bit comical to some extent, but um, important again, because we're always going to be looking at how Troy treats Corey versus how Troy treats Leon's. They're both his son, right? So we want to be attentive to that, and that's why it's there. All right. And again, we're going to have to talk more about Gabriel in the next video, but King of the Jungle, what's that? All right. Um, well, again, we'll need to talk about it in more depth. The relationship between Bono and Troy is another one to be very attentive. Remember, in this scene, we discover that Troy met Bono in prison when they were in prison together, and so this is a very tight friendship. And of course, we're going to see when we get into Act Two the strain, and we've already had hints of it, right? We've had hints of a bit of a strain on this relationship between Troy and Bono, insofar that Bono is a follower of Troy, looks up to Troy, but he seems to be concerned about Troy's relationship with Alberta, right? Which is going to come to a head in the first scene of Act Two. Um, Watch how that unfolds in terms of what their relationship is like, and what role Bono plays in an ironic twist of a reversal of roles, where Bono suddenly is giving the advice to Troy. Okay, because what we've seen mainly is Bono as a follower of Troy, an admirer of Troy, and Troy playing that part as the leader of the pack, if you will. But things are going to shift a bit once we get into Act Two. All right. Uh, and Bono, hell, I love you too, right? This exchange, mind you, they're drinking quite a bit. It's Friday night. And just to wrap this bit up, Bono starts to exit as Corey enters the yard dressed in his football uniform. Remember, he left at the beginning of this scene to go play football. That a game. And again, you want to be looking at the structure of this. All that talk about Bono's father and Troy's father, with Leon being there. Leon's being there as one of the sons reveals so much to us about the relationship that Troy had with his father, helping us understand more why Troy might be behaving the way he does towards his sons. All that comes to a flourish here when Corey comes in. He throws his helmet down in the direction of Troy. Okay, and Rose, what's the matter, Corey? What's the matter? And here it is. Papa Dunn went up and told Coach Zellman, I can't play football no more. Wouldn't even let me play the game. Told the recruiter not to come. Again, look at this structurally. Everything that was just transpiring, the Bono and Troy's interaction after this long discussion about fathers and sons, their I love yous and all this, they're a little buzzed from the drinking. And then we find out that Troy has now just squashed Corey's opportunity to play football. Remember, it's not just so he can play the game of football and have fun. It's also the recruiter who has the opportunity to offer a scholarship so that Corey can go to college and better his life. And watch Rose's reaction always. Rose becomes such a vital character, just builds the character development. Um, And the boy know why I did it, right? He's talking about, why did you do that? Why you want to do that to me? That was the one chance I had, right? There it is. Corey said, why would you do that? That's the one chance I had. Rose is defending Corey. There's nothing wrong with Corey playing football. And here's the reason, though, right? Remember the agreement they had made. I'll let you play football, but you got to keep working. You got to keep working at the A&P. Corey said, okay, I'll keep working at least on the weekends. A little ambiguous there, but he said he'd keep working. Troy did what he did because the boy lied to me. All right? Now, we talked about, back when we were in class, how much emphasis, and we get this through Bono's description of Troy, how important truth is to Troy. Ironically, because we see how often he's not telling the truth, and not just when he fantasizes and goes into these long, exaggerated stories, embellished stories, but as we're going to find out in Act 2, the lie he's been keeping from everyone. The lie that Bono first figures out, and the lie that ultimately he has to reveal to Rose about his affair. And of course, this is happening, that revelation about him lying about his affair is going to come in the first scene of Act 2, which follows this. But the whole reason that Troy did what he did, this harsh, had him thrown off the football team, was because Corey lied to him. Right? He was to keep up his chores and hold down the job. That were the conditions. Okay? And then Corey's defending it. I can't work after this fool, but Pop, I tried to tell you that they're holding the job for me. You don't want to ever listen to nobody, and then you want to go and do this to me. And Troy's reaction, I ain't done nothing to you. You've done it to yourself. Now, it's, again, as in so many of these interactions between Corey and Troy, is Troy doing this because he's just mean-spirited, because it seems like an extraordinarily harsh thing to do? Or, as he says himself, I ain't done nothing to you. You done it to yourself. You lied. I was willing to compromise, and we've seen little tastes of Troy willing to compromise. Remember, with the TV, he tells Corey, you get $100, I'll match your $100. Right? After he was risen. So we see these little glimmers of, reasonableness. Does this moment when it's revealed to us that Troy has had him thrown off the football team because he lied, all right? Not because he quit his job, as much as because he lied. This gets into the sense of duty, do the right thing, responsibility, right? All these elements that Troy insists are necessary to be a man, if you will, okay? And yet we know that, Troy breaks these rules as well. So why such harsh treatment towards Corey over this? Corey's response is, just because you didn't have a chance, you just scared I'm better than you, that's all. All right, so this is, an understandable response. And Troy saying, all right, see, you done made a mistake. Corey's saying, I didn't do nothing. And Troy says here, I'm going to tell you what your mistake was. And remember, it's about the line. See, you swung at the ball and didn't hit it. That's strike one. See you in the batter's box now. You swing and you miss. That's strike one. Don't strike out. So everything ultimately comes back to this baseball metaphor. And I know you're not all baseball people necessarily, or fans of baseball. But what this is telling us is it's not so much that Troy doesn't want Corey to play football. He was willing to let him play that football under certain conditions. And we want to again be coming in and ask yourself, are those conditions unreasonable? You can play football, but I want you to still hold your job at the A&P and make sure you do your chores. On top of that, yes, Troy goes on and says, you're wasting your time with football. You're never going to make it in football. You should learn a trade. We talked about this in the last video. You should learn a trade, something that no one can take away from you. This dream of being a football, or even the dream of going to college, is not going to. It's not going to give you security in life, but you can still play football as long as you meet my conditions. And not only does he not meet the conditions, but he lies. And that's an important factor, because what we're going to find in our next video, and maybe we'll discuss it tomorrow, I'm sure we will discuss it tomorrow, is what happens in the next scene, in Act 2, Scene 1, where now we're going to find that Troy's been lying. So the hypocrisy. And what does this say about Troy's character? Okay, and then as we're watching this development of Troy's character, as more of his character is being revealed to us, how others respond to him once they recognize these elements of Troy's character. And you want to be very attentive to not just how Corey's going to respond, and Bono, but now as we get into Act 2, very importantly, be attentive to Rose. We've had here a big buildup, and we've been focusing mainly on Troy. But now, let's see, now when the big reveal is going to happen in the next scene, how Rose navigates through that. And then we compare. What I want you to be looking at as you read Act 2 is Rose's commitment to the same types of principles that Troy insists on, and how Troy breaks away from those principles compared to how Rose adheres to them, and to some degree how all the other characters relate to those principles that are so that Troy insists on. So it's not just the hypocrisy of Troy, right? It's more assessing why the hypocrisy, or how the hypocrisy impacts his decision making in terms of his own hubris, his own selfishness, and what he expects from others, and what others expect from him, and how this works. Very importantly, as we get into Act 2, how does it impact the family unit as a whole, keeping in mind, right, the idea of fences, right, and particularly what we're going to find in the next act and in the first scene is a much clearer and more focused emphasis on the fences and what they mean metaphorically. Okay, remember, there's literal fences, right, and then there's the metaphorical fences. So be attentive, pay attention to that as you go into Act 2. Do try to finish the play. Clearly, we're going to need at least one more video on fences, probably two. And we'll see how it goes. And I'll really get your feel. Hopefully, you have a chance to look at this video before tomorrow. But we'll talk more about it tomorrow. And we'll take it from there. Stay attentive to the Omnivox for what I'm posting. And if you do watch this, and I hope you do before we meet tomorrow at 2 o'clock, come with your questions. You know, for me, it's feeding off of your questions as much as anything that really, I think, drives the whole teaching, learning experience. So come with questions tomorrow, and we'll see how that goes. And everyone, stay safe. Be patient with our new teaching platform, and we'll see you tomorrow.